Hi everyone, welcome to another timecode tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to look at creating some kind of text embedded in 3D space. There is already a tutorial out there specifically for non-CS6 and Creative Cloud users that shows you how to do this using nulls and 3D text layers or text layers in 3D space. So if you have got CS 5.5 and below, then check out that tutorial. I'll put a link at the bottom to that right now. If you have got CS6 or Creative Cloud, then do carry on watching. We're going to look at using the camera tracker tool to achieve this effect. So let's get straight in there. We're going to use this bit of footage which we used on the last tutorial, which is just a tracking shot, go from right to left. And let's drop that straight in our project window. So same drill as our other tutorial, we're going to click and drag with your video layer onto your new composition button down here, and you'll get a new composition with the settings that you need. Let's go to composition settings and change this to 0. I don't know why that does that on mine, but it does, and hit OK. So the first thing we're going to do is click on our video layer, right click and go to track camera. In our other tutorial we did track motion. Make sure you're on track camera for this. You'll get this blue bar that says analyzing. I'm going to cancel that. Initially, go to my advanced tab just here, drop that down, and make sure detailed analysis is checked. Now once you check that box, it should initialize and start tracking again as it did a second ago. Now it does take a lot longer, probably 5 or 6, maybe even 7 times longer than just doing a standard track. It is worth doing because of the time that you save later on, not having to tweak your tracking points that you're given. So let it do its thing, and I'll meet you once mine has finished. Once your camera tracker has finished doing the solving, you should be left with a load of these tracking points in your scene. Now in my case, I've got as many as you can see here. If I click and drag, you get this kind of impression that it's all moving with our scene. But if you look closely, especially down here to the bottom left hand corner, if I click and drag, you can see they kind of float off in their own orbit, which isn't good. You might get away with it if it was like a tiny bit of animation you were doing, but with the amount that we're going to use, this it won't do. So if you have the same problem as me, then do follow closely with the next steps. If you don't, then by all means go ahead and skip forward to the next section. But for those that are having this issue, for me it was a relatively simple fix. I had to go to my solve method and change it from auto detect to typical. That will resolve the camera, and you should get a load of points again. And in my case they're a lot smaller, as you can see here, but they are fixed much better to a majority of the scene, as you can tell. So for me that worked really well. If you've got a kind of panning shot, or if you've got a flat scene as it says here, try these out, see which one works best for you. Everyone's going to have different results depending on your footage that you filmed. So once you've got this, we can go ahead, we can either choose to triangulate between 3 points like we could here on the floor or over here on the box. What I'm going to do is I'm going to choose one of these points on the box over here. I'm going to single click on any of these points and then right click and choose create text and camera. Now what that's done is created a really small text layer, you can barely see it, and it's given us a camera, which you can't really tell that it's done anything at this point. But if we go to our text layer, single click and increase the size of the font using our character tab over here, click and drag, you should see it scale up. So I've gone to about 1,000 size value on my text, and it's still not very big by comparison to what it normally would be. So once I've done that, I'm going to go to my text layer, single click, hit S for scale, and just slide it up until you're happy with the size. So that looks good to me. Now if I click and drag through my timeline, you should be able to see that your text is fixed to the point that you chose. Now that's cool. I'm going to slide this out just a touch. Now if you're having the same issue as me, when you click and drag, once you've done the same steps, it doesn't move as much as it would do as if we had another piece of text. So let's just throw a bit in here to show what I mean. So I've got 2 text layers here. This one isn't 3D, it's nothing to do with my scene, but if I click and drag on it, it moves with my mouse cursor. Whereas this one, when I use my X value here, it doesn't really keep up to speed. So the way to get around that is when you're moving your layers, if you hold shift on the keyboard and click and drag, it kind of emphasizes your movement and gives you a bit more flexibility. So I'm going to move it just to the left and up a touch for the first layer, and let's review that. So that's starting to look a little more like our example. Let's review that again. There we go. So we can see the graphics kind of swinging in from the right. Okay, so we don't now have to go back to our video layer, camera tracker, and make another null for each bit. Once we've got our first text layer in with our camera, we can just go ahead and duplicate using Apple D if you're Mac or Control D if you're Windows, and slide it down into the position, and Apple D again, slide down again, Apple D again, and one more, slide down. Now the next step is useful, not necessarily that important, but we want to get these layers, so the bottom layer, to be at the bottom of our layers in our window down here. So I'm on this layer, I'm going to drag that to the bottom, go to my second layer, drag that above number 4, drag that one, drag it above number 3, and so on. So we should have, if you've got 4 layers like me, you should have the same setup that I've got now. You'll see why that's handy in a minute. The next thing we need to do is give this some rotation, so make it spin like our example that we had just here. So we only need to do this for one layer. Let's do it with this top one. I'm going to single click on the layer, hit R on the keyboard, and bring up my Y rotation value. Now if I click and drag, at the moment it's spinning around the middle point of my layer, which doesn't give us the effect that we want. I'm going to undo that, Apple Z. So the next thing we need to do is move our anchor point so that it's sat on the right hand side of our text layer to make it spin in like our example does. So to do this, I'm going to highlight all of my text layers using the shift key, and I'm going to hit A on the keyboard. Now I get 3 numbers here. The first set of numbers represents your X, which is your left to right. Second is your Y, up and down, and your Z, back and forward. So I only need to move in X space, so I'm going to move it all to the left. So what's happening is it looks like we're moving our text layer and our anchor point is staying the same. It is in a way, but it's actually our anchor point value that we're changing. So all our text is shifted away from where we had it before, so don't forget to move that back into the position that you want. So let's say around here. So now if I hit R on the keyboard, back to my rotation value, with all my layers selected still, if I get my Y rotation and click and drag, they all have this kind of barn door swinging motion, which is what we want. So the next step is to go to, I'm going to go just a few frames in and set a keyframe for my Y rotation. So hit the stopwatch and put it to the position that you want it to start at. So for me, I'm going to say start around here. Then I'm going to move forward a few frames. Let's have a nice slow animation and swing it back into view, so it should be 0 for the value. Now what these keyframes mean is at this point, for all of my layers, rotate at that point that it's at here. If I click and drag, it's going to swing back to our first position. That's all these keyframes mean. Now as well as having some rotation, I want them to fade into view. So I'm going to go to the first keyframe point, make sure you're lined over the top of that. Select my layers using shift again, hit T on the keyboard, and I'm going to hit my opacity stopwatch for one of these layers, and it will make a keyframe for all of them. Once I've done that, I'm going to knock it to 0. Now to get this in time with them swinging in, you can kind of see where it stops with the outline of your layer, but to be absolutely accurate, if you hold shift and then tap U on the keyboard, it will show you any of the keyframes for the layers above it. Really handy little button there. So the last thing I need to do is slide up my opacity value back to 100. So now what I've got is 4 keyframes for each layer, and all they're saying is at this point be at that rotation value at 0 opacity. Then we move forward. These set of keyframes are saying be at this rotation and full opacity. That's how we get our animation from left to right. Now you can go ahead and change your keyframe interpolation, and all that is, if I go to my rotation, I'm going to choose the last keyframe, right click on it and go to keyframe interpolation. If I change it from linear to Bezier, all this is doing, it's kind of hard to tell, but if you watch the rotation carefully, you can't really tell all too well on there. Let's look at it on the graph view just to illustrate what I'm saying. If I choose my rotation, choose this button here, that's why, I can basically draw my own curve in, which represents the animation path for this layer. So if we watch that back in our timeline, you should see a difference between the top and the rest of the layers, how they animate. So our lower layers kind of have a linear, so a start and a stop. They kind of not jolt, but they don't ease into their motion or kind of come to a steady halt like the top one does. Anyway, that's for you guys to have a play around with. I'm going to undo that. Now the next thing you notice in our example is that they are offset in time. They don't all swing in at the same time. It's a really easy way to get around this. All we're going to do is with our layers in the order, so from top to bottom like we did earlier, I'm going to go to my second layer, and if I slide my layer along just a touch, so let's see how many frames I've gone there. If I use the page down tool, I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's go to around there, and again 7 frames on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's put that one there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. It doesn't have to be 7 frames, you guys can do whatever you want to, but this should give you that kind of staggered swinging motion which we've got. Cool. Now these text layers, you don't have to use text. They could be video layers, they could be images, photos, they could be your own graphics like that you've imported from Photoshop, whatever you want. So it's a really, really powerful tool, this. And once you've got your sort of basic text like we've got here, let's say we wanted more kind of further down the corridor, I can just duplicate using Apple D again, and holding Shift I can slide that back. So let's go towards those dark kind of bits at the back there. Now that layer, if I hit U, it shows you all the keyframes. It's going to do exactly the same thing as this, just in a different place. So if you watch it back, there we go. Now the reason it's kind of already set in space is because the movement of the text is governed by our camera layer, which was made right at the beginning when we chose to make our text in camera. You can look at it by clicking on this button here, Active View, and go to Custom View 1. And if we zoom out, what you'll see if I click on my camera layer is this kind of path that it goes along. Now that's essentially the track that I used when I was filming it, and you can even see how the layers interact with the camera's view. So food for thought. Let's go back to our Active View. Now if we wanted to throw in some more text to the left or more graphics like we had, we can do that. We can either duplicate and try sliding it into the position that we want. Word of warning, if you're doing this method and you've got a lot of camera movement, you're probably going to see some kind of like shake going on with your motion of your layers that you've made, depending on how it was shot. So in this case it's not too bad. Obviously the rotation's wrong. Change my rotation, I'm going to hit R on the keyboard, and I'm going to change my anchor point as well, so I'm going to hold Shift and hit A. So I need to move my anchor point so that it's all the way over to the left of my layer, move it back into the position that I want, so around here. Let's go up a touch as well. And I now need to change my rotation, so I want it to start facing backwards and end as it is. So if you watch that back, we've got our text layer. Now we can do exactly the same thing we did earlier, so single click on your layer, Apple D for duplicate, Apple D again and again, and let's move these layers into the position that we want. So let's say we want one down here, and we want another layer on this box, one on that box, and let's do the last one near the top. So if you watch this back, we should have the same thing we had before. Oh, we're missing one. Let's duplicate this layer, throw it up. Okay, so let's preview that back. So again, to make these layers over here staggered in time, I need to make sure that the order's correct. I've been a bit lazy with it, it isn't, so let's put that at the bottom. So let's put that and then number 8 there, number 7, and 5 at the top. So if I select these layers from 8 to 5 and hit U, we can see our keyframes, and I'm going to do the same as I did before, so 7 frames ahead. So if I start at this point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I've got largely the same effect that I had for my other set of text layers. So there we go. That is essentially how we go about building our scene using our camera tracker tool and throwing some text layers in there. As I say before, the principle for any graphic that you throw in there, be it video or text layers, images, it's all going to use the same tools that we've used in this tutorial. So go and film your own scenes. It can be anywhere you like. Try some really shaky shots, try some not so shaky shots, and yeah, post me your responses. I'll be interested to see what you guys can come up with. Until next time, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you later.